As of me writing this, I have recently completed Xenoblade Chronicles 3's DLC campaign, Future Redeemed. Thanks to this, I'm finally capable of doing something that I've wanted to do for at least a year now. More specifically, since Xenoblade 3 was first announced. And I don't think there's any better time than this. The Xeno, or as I'll continue to call it from this point onwards, Perfect Works franchise is one of my favorite series of all time. I've been following it for more than a decade now, and it's finally reached a sort of conclusion. So I'm dedicating the next few videos to it. This will be an all-inclusive look at every single piece of media in the series that I find interesting that isn't some sort of miscellaneous merchandise like figurines or keychains. From games to manga and anime to even weird books that were released at some point somewhere in the world. I would like to clarify up front that these videos will be kept entirely spoiler-free for the most part, with spoiler sections being warned of beforehand. In that vein, I'd also like to ask you, the person watching this, to withhold from making comments that would spoil something for potential new players. I won't make any false promises, so I'll be as blunt as possible. These videos will not be an analysis or dissection of the stories that the series tells. That's not what I'm interested in, and plenty of others have done that before me, and better than I ever could, so I really don't want to do that. These videos will be purely about my opinion on these games and trying to dissect why I find them to be worth playing, as well as the corresponding side materials. With all of that said, I welcome you to Xenogears. Many words could be used to describe Xenogears. Mechanically broken and blatantly unfinished don't even begin to describe the extent of this game's issues. And yet it is my favorite game on the PlayStation. I assume that if you're watching this, you're at least tangentially familiar with the story behind Xenogears' creation, but in case you aren't, here's a little refresher. Since I find the story of the developers just as, if not more interesting, than the story of the games themselves. Xenogears was originally conceived as a potential pitch for Final Fantasy VII, conceived by one Tetsuya Takahashi and his wife, Kaori Tanaka, better known by her pen name Xenosaga, who had previously worked as the graphics director for Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. Needless to say, Square Enix said fuck that and told him that the story would be too dark and complicated for a fantasy, which is kind of ironic considering that FF7 is a sci-fi dystopia about bioterrorism, but I digress. They did however give him the okay to turn it into a standalone project. The game entered development as Project Noah, a title that's going to be relevant again approximately 2 videos from now. They thought about making it a Chrono Trigger sequel at first, but that idea quickly went nowhere, so the original IP Xenogears was born. Takahashi himself would serve as the project's director and as one of its writers, alongside his wife and Chrono Trigger writer Masaru Kato. Originally, Takahashi wished for Tetsuya Nomura to be appointed as the project's character designer, however, he was busy working on FF7 at the time, so Kunihiko Tanaka got that role instead. A decision I am very thankful for, considering what would end up happening almost 20 years later. The reason why I'm mentioning all of these developers in particular is because of their involvement later on in the series' history. The same goes for the composer, Yasunori Mitsuda, whom I'll talk about more later on. After approximately 2 years in development, Xenogears was finally released in 1998, so it's about time I start talking about the game itself, beginning with the gameplay. Unlike the later Xenoblade games, Xenogears follows the same structure as most of Squaresoft's other RPGs at the time. Exploration is primarily split into 3 segments. You've got the towns and bases, where you just walk around, talk to NPCs, upgrade your equipment, etc. The second is the overworld, where you travel from the village of Schützburg to the capital of, I don't fucking know, Romania, or wherever else your next objective is, where you then enter a dungeon, which is where most of your time playing will take place. The dungeons themselves are never too bad, barring the final one, which we don't talk about. The gimmicks are usually either pretty simple to figure out or borderline non-existent, so it's usually just a matter of finding the right path to progress forward. But there are issues, and all of them stem from the camera. Because of the semi-isometric nature of the game, it's pretty easy to lose your orientation, especially early on. The game has no minimap to speak of, so the only thing you get to reorient yourself is a compass. Once you get used to it, finding your way around is honestly pretty simple, as the dungeon layout is never that complex. But unfortunately, that is not the only hurdle keeping many people from giving this game a fair shake. You can probably guess already, but the real issue is the random encounters, because there are a lot of them. Sometimes it feels like you can't even take 5 steps without being thrust into an encounter. I don't mind this, as I tend to play a lot of older RPGs, so high encounter rates really don't bother me, and I do think that by the time you're halfway through the game, you'll have gotten used to them. Know what I can't get used to though? Random encounters while platforming. At several points in the game, you'll be thrust into a platforming section, which is bad enough as is for an RPG, however, they don't disable encounters during them, making for some extremely frustrating sections. Encounters don't start whilst you're midair. However, it's not uncommon for an encounter to start the second you even touch the ground, making you fall off or barely miss. It is infuriating and happens way more often than it should. This is especially annoying because the movement when jumping just feels really off. It's got this weird delay and weight to it that makes it more irritating than it needs to be. I know that it's hard to visualize and probably not noticeable in the footage, so you'll just have to take my word for it. It can get pretty annoying. This is only made worse by the fact that load times in the game are really fucking annoying. Opening and closing the menu or entering a room takes way more than it reasonably should, and it can get pretty irritating. I grew used to it after a while, but I can't speak for everyone. And since we're already on the subject, let's talk about combat. First, let's talk about the on-foot battles. Fundamentally, it's like any other turn-based RPG. Every character takes turns attacking until a party with less health dies. Where it gets interesting is how Xenogears tries to deviate from the formula. The way magic works in this game is just about the only thing it has in common with, say, Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest. You pick a spell and the enemies spontaneously combust. Everything else, however, functions off a rather unique system. Each time you attack, you can choose one of 3 attack types corresponding to the face buttons. Each of them uses a different amount of action points. You can then chain as many attacks together as you have AP. This is where the mechanic of the game, the death blows, comes into play. Every time you use a certain combination, you slowly build up experience on that combination, and once you fill it up to 100 and reach a certain level, you unlock a corresponding death blow. Now, every time you use that specific string of attacks, you ended off with an extremely powerful special attack. If you end up using one that leaves some AP over, they get stored in an additional meter, where you can then use them to chain multiple death blows together. Essentially, it works like this. Say you want to chain together a 4 AP, a 5 AP, and a 6 AP death blow. Then you'll need to have at least 15 leftover AP stored, so you can do that. It's an extremely cool system, but it comes with a massive caveat. Getting those death blows is a giant pain in the ass. The ideal way to go about it is to always do the combination that levels up the highest tier death blow you could theoretically do with your current amount of max AP. This will ensure that you automatically unlock it the second you reach the necessary level. At the same time, it also slowly levels up every single death blow below it. The reason why this sucks is that doing this prevents you from actively using your strongest moves, which causes regular encounters to feel like they go on forever. I've seen a lot of people call the game ridiculously grindy because of that, and honestly, I can't agree. It's not grindy at all. If you just fight the enemies as they come, then you'll be just fine no matter what, because the game is just insultingly easy. The issue is that the people who complain about grinding are usually the ones who try to get as many death blows as they can as soon as they're available. I can see why some would try to do that, but let's be honest for a second here. You seriously don't need that shit. As soon as you get used to the frequent random encounters and realize that you don't need every death blow, the game becomes significantly more enjoyable. Unfortunately, that comes with a problem of its own: the gear battles. Yeah, it's about time I mentioned them considering they're a part of the title. Before I get into how they tie into the on-foot death blows, let me quickly explain how they work in general. So now and again, you'll be thrust into situations where you'll be piloting your gear. In the overworld, this changes nothing whatsoever. Combat, on the other hand, changes quite a bit. You can summon your gears while on foot too, but that only applies to certain areas and doesn't include bosses, so it's kind of pointless. Because the biggest change made is that the gears run on fuel. Every single attack uses fuel, and the only way to effectively refill it is at dedicated gear shops, where you can also buy new parts to upgrade them even further, which is the only way to improve their stats, making grinding XP for them a pointless struggle. The way death blows work also changes. All gear death blows consist of just 2 buttons. To use them, you first have to raise your gear's attack level, which you do after unlocking them. Attacking once gets you to level 1, then 2, then 3, and finally level infinity, which consists of only a single button input. And this is where it ties into the on-foot combat, because to unlock more gear death blows, you need to unlock on-foot ones of the respective character. And that's why not actively grinding out death blows can become a pain in the ass, because most major story battles, as well as the entire endgame, consist exclusively of gear battles, making them significantly more important than regular characters. Another issue with the combat for both is that it, frankly, is fucking broken. If you equip an E for double or an Ellie, you become strong enough to insta-kill almost any boss ahead of you, and Citan is simply just broken beyond belief, having ridiculously high speed stats and an insane damage output, paired with the ability to heal. Not using him is like actively handicapping yourself. Now, that's it for regular gameplay. However, there is an entire dedicated fighting game mode, which is the central part of one of the story's arcs. It plays extremely janky, but is very cool for the time, even letting you set the maximum amount of FPS you want. I honestly think you'd have a harder time losing these battles than winning them, but I just wanted to mention them because they're cool. and it's an awesome showcase of what the engine was capable of. And in case you're wondering what the weight system does, nothing. It never affects you. It's an unused mechanic that does not affect anything, so it literally does not matter. That's all for the gameplay though, so let's talk about one of my favorite things about this game, the music. The music was composed by Yasunori Mitsuda. This man is an absolute legend, and despite this being one of his earliest projects, being his first major work since Chrono Trigger in '95, this is, in my humble opinion, his magnum opus. This soundtrack, much like everything else in the game, forms the basis of everything Xeno would end up becoming. The compositions take heavily from Irish, in particular Celtic, music. These instruments are a staple and a part of every Mitsuda-composed Xeno soundtrack, and even find themselves in the games where he wasn't involved in. Though we'll talk about that once we get around to it. Every single song in the OST is wonderful, perfectly complementing each situation, from the fantastic battle themes to the moody dungeon tracks. Furthermore, there are also 2 vocal tracks in the game, kinda. One of them went unused, being a vocal rendition of the world map theme. The other song, however, marks the beginning of a tradition with every single Xeno game. The credits themes are always vocal tracks, and the lyrics are always written by Takahashi himself. Joanne Hogg, the singer for these songs specifically, would end up doing the same for Xenosaga 1's credits theme, after which she took a break from the series. Though she did miraculously come back for there were also 2 special arrangement albums released for the soundtrack. One of them was Creed, wherein the music was arranged by the Millennial Fair Musical Ensemble. The other one was an album called Myth, the Xenogears orchestral album, which was not made by Irish people, but instead by Bulgarians? Joanne Hogg's still there though. Yeah, that's all I have to say about the music, let's get back on track. I promised not to spoil anything, so I'll keep this section brief. The story is the one thing that's going to keep you going. If you're here for the gameplay, then you'll be very disappointed. Naturally, the story needs to be extremely captivating to justify this, and I'm extremely happy to be able to say that it is. Shit gets going within the first minute of the game. I find the opening to be fucking genius. You're thrust into this fascinating sequence showing you the destruction of the gigantic spaceship, only to be pulled away from that scenario entirely and brought to the small village life of Fei Fong Long, where shit gets going within 15 to 20 minutes of play. The game is really good at keeping things interesting at every turn. I'll get more into this later in the spoiler section, but the Lahan village segment is quite possibly one of my favorite openings to any video game. And because of this, it pains me to say that as well as the game manages to pull you in and keep you interested, the second major arc in the game is an insanely tedious slog that goes on for far too long and has little payoff for the characters. Remember the fighting minigame I mentioned earlier? This is where it comes into play. It's just one fight after another, followed by a dogshit dungeon with easily the worst boss in the game, as he can insta-kill your party members. Something even the final boss can't do. Only to be returned to some fighting until you're finally allowed to leave. This entire story segment just kills the pace, and while it serves as a neat bit of world building, it should not have gone on as long as it did. Thankfully, the story does pick up again right after this, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone decided they've had enough at this point and just drop it. Another issue is the characters. It's not that they're bad, quite the opposite. Everything in the story, including the characters, serves as the fundamental structure of every single Perfect Works game going forward. The story structure and personality archetypes are all established right here. I'll go into the character-specific parallels in the later games once I get to those respective games, but since we're here, let's establish the general archetypes without going into spoilers. We can do so later. There's always a peace-loving protagonist who fights to protect the people he cares about, who also suffers from some very clear mental health problems, their emotional counterpart who is also just as psychologically screwed, the man who knows a little bit more about the world than most do, and also wields a katana, the hot-headed bronze of the party, the machine life form, the teenager with a firearm, the Furby, the always composed strong guy with a heart of gold and some serious trauma to process, and lastly, the little girl with daddy issues. I've heavily simplified them, and the parallels in later games are never always one-to-one, with their roles and even designs often being shuffled around and given to multiple characters at once. In this game, unfortunately, multiple party members just kind of stop existing after the arc ends. Riku and Maria could be written out of the story entirely, and would barely change, and Emeralda doesn't get relevant until an endgame side quest. And then of course there's the biggest problem with the game's story, Disc 2. I realize that I'm probably making it sound like the story falls apart at this point, but the issue is actually quite the opposite. Sometime during development, the team had their development time cut dramatically, forcing them to turn Disc 2 into a rush job. In order to not sacrifice everything they had planned for the story, the team decided to put their focus on it, rather than the gameplay, and because of this, Disc 2 largely consists of expository cutscenes in which the characters sit down in a chair and just tell you what's happening. Is it extremely funny and iconic? Yes. but it's also a damn shame. But you should pay attention, and you should keep going, because this too is also where the many mysteries of the game finally start unraveling. Because the story is something truly special, and there has never been anything quite like it. Well, barring later Perfect Works games, but you get the idea. If anything in this video so far has seemed in any way interesting to you, and you still haven't done so, then I implore you to go and play this game right now. It's absolutely worth your time, even if you may not feel like it at first. But stick with it, and you won't regret it. Everything from the world itself to its intricate backstory is meticulously written, and I want to give a massive shout out to the absolute legend, Richard Honeywood, who is the man behind the localization. Is it perfect? Fuck no. In fact, it's full of weird phrases like, "My dad? You mean my father?" and "Sorry, Dory." But I won't lie, I think there's a very distinct charm to having Faye say stupid shit like, "Scrumdiddlyumptious," and considering the fact that he had to dumb down the religious subtext without distilling the point too much, and took care of nearly the entire project entirely by himself, I cannot help but be impressed. It's also worth noting that he even had an impact on the story as a whole, proposing a name change that ended up being beneficial to the story in the grand scheme of things. So it's not like he made any changes without the approval of the original team either. In spite of all of this, the game still ended up selling extremely well, having shipped 1.19 million copies worldwide, despite never having been released in Europe. This would remain the highest grossing game in the franchise until Xenoblade 2, and that's fucking insane if you ask me. But going back to the story, I don't think anything encapsulates why I love this game's plots as much as I do as one of its main antagonists. Grahf is one of my favorite antagonists out of any RPG, and he functions as a perfect foil to the party. Much like the protagonists, the villains also serve as a basis for archetypes later on in the series. I'll get into this more in the spoiler segment, so for now let's just stick to Grahf specifically. He's a very prominent force throughout the story, and all of his appearances are extremely memorable. He always shows up when you least expect him to, and right until the end his allegiances are never clear, making you second guess his every move. And hell, I'd argue that his introduction is one of the 3 most iconic things in the game. He says this line every single time he shows up to make sure you remember it. The very first time he shows up, he randomly talks about wanting to kill God, throws a giant butt-plug dragon at you and fucks off. And if you don't think that's fucking awesome, then I don't think we can be friends. And since we're already talking about characters, I'm legally obligated to mention the best one, Big Joe. Big Joe is everywhere in the game, and he is fucking epic. It is Joe time, he loves Amor time, do not interrupt his Amor time, because the card game in this game is fucking bullshit. The next segment will contain spoilers, so if you still haven't played Xenogears, then please skip to the next segment or to this timestamp on screen. For everyone else, this segment will just be me discussing the antagonists and some of the main cast as well as my favorite moments in the game. One of my favorite things about these characters is how fundamentally flawed they are. Not just due to their clear psychological damage, but just as people. Faye's personality is fake, and whilst it is a manifestation of all his hate and suffering, when you look at him in past incarnations, a very clear image of self-righteousness and arrogance is painted. Kim Kasim especially shows a version of him where those ideas are so prevalent to the point where he ends up presenting the world around him so much, he creates new life. This also serves as a basis for characters later on in the series. This is where I'd like to expand on the character archetypes a little. I believe that every villain archetype serves as a mirror or inversion of sorts to one of the protagonist archetypes, which ties into the aspects of Jungian psychology that this series heavily takes from. Grahf and id both serve as inversions of the contact, showing what they ultimately would have become without the influence of the antitype, someone who is extremely codependent in order to fully achieve what she was meant to do. And of course Ellie has her own inversion in Miyoung. I genuinely find Miyoung terrifying. The cosmic horror elements of this franchise are some of my favorite parts, and she perfectly encapsulates that. But hell, even characters like Bart and Satan get a mirror in the form of characters like Ramses and Krillian respectively. Whilst Bart shows himself to accept help from others and grows stronger through it, Ramses' mindless obsession with hunting Faye down eats away at him. He gradually loses his humanity, and by the time the game has reached its conclusion, chances are he's either dead or completely broken to the point of a complete psychological shutdown. Meanwhile, Krillian is so obsessed with his research and ultimately his desire to become a god that the Zora itself literally ends up consuming him. And since we're on the subject, holy shit, Satan is a genius character. It's clear from the very beginning that he's extremely shady and knows way too much, and his connections to Solaris are very evident. The game actively nudges you into believing he'll end up betraying the party, which it ultimately fakes out when he tries to get to id. Even if he was essentially Truman showing Faye's life during the time in Lahan, it was never out of malice. It was fear. And that same fear is why I find the Lahan village section reputation to be one of the best. Sure, it lulls you into a false sense of security and then makes it violently fall apart, but at the same time, it also shows us something pretty odd. Citan is living away from the rest of the village. It's enough of a distance to make you wonder how people are supposed to reach the supposed village doctor in an emergency. It's something you'll not realize immediately, but once they reveal that he was explicitly there to watch over Faye, it becomes pretty evident that he was fully aware that something like this was probably going to happen. He fucking knew that it would one day show up and destroy everything, and he built his house far away enough to the point that it is the only thing that remains of Lahan village even in the endgame. It's a genius bit of environmental storytelling and really reinforces why I love this game. Another thing I'd like to talk about is how I really hate it when people call this game anti-religious or some bullshit. No, it's not. If anything, it's pro-religion, explicitly stating that the belief in God needs to be found within oneself. Did those people and I play the same fucking game? Because if we did, then they should know that Deus isn't actually God, right? That's enough about spoilers, let's move on. Don't worry, I didn't forget about the Zohar, but I believe it's best to leave talking about it to the Saga section of the series, since there's more than enough time for that. For now, let's invite the clueless not players back in. And thus concludes Xenogears, Episode 5. Yeah, you heard me. It'll make sense shortly. Now that we've got the game itself out of the way, let's start talking about the remaining side materials. First off, Perfect Works. Well, I guess the full name is Perfect Works the Real Thing, but that name is fucking stupid, I'm not calling it that. This is required reading for everyone who's played Xenogears. This fucking thing fills every single minor gap in the story and fleshes out the world to an absurd degree. Almost all our information on how the rules of this franchise work stems from this fucking book. And what does this also give us? The outline to the franchise's episode structure. Xenogears was conceived as a 6-episode epic, with the first game being merely episode 5. Perfect Works gives us an elaborate timeline of every episode and outline of their contents. Unfortunately, Takahashi never got to finish the Xenogears version of the timeline, but that definitely didn't stop him from trying again with both Xenosaga and Xenoblade stories, which also follow the exact same structure, albeit with some changes. I'll explain when I get around to them. Fact of the matter is, you should absolutely read what's in this fucking thing. It doesn't just enhance the story, it completes it. Unlike the next thing we'll talk about, which doesn't either. Xenogears, a god-slaying story first chapter, is a non-canon prequel novel to the game, written by Masatoshi Kusakabe, and published on April 1st, 1998, almost 2 months after the game. And although the release date may fool you into thinking it's a joke of a story, it's not. Unfortunately, I was not able to get my hands on it, as every copy I was able to find at a reasonable price either became disproportionately expensive with shipping fees, or simply wasn't available at the time. This sucks, as there are no scans of it anywhere online, and the closest thing I've found were extremely low quality scans of some of the artwork in it. But for the sake of completion, I'm still talking about it anyway. Just keep in mind that everything I'm about to say stems from Japanese reviews on sites like Mercari and Amazon. I can place no guarantee on their validity. The story is set some years before the events of the main story, and follows 2 simultaneous plot strings. The first is about Grahf, who, having gained new power, is looking for his old gear, the ORW. The second plot string follows Jesiah and his team as they explore the same ruins for tech from an ancient civilization. It apparently deviates quite heavily from the world in the game. Going off of Japanese reviews, opinions on this book seem quite mixed, with some praising the interesting story, though I've mostly just seen people complain about how the story isn't Xenogears enough. Also, apparently this woman here is supposed to be Hyuga or something. I really hope that's just me misunderstanding something and that isn't actually the case, because that would be really fucking weird. One last thing to note, however, is that the art, although there may be very little of it and it's in very low quality for the most part, is pretty fucking cool. And I really hope some legend ends up uploading scans of the entire thing to the internet one day. But as it stands, this is unfortunately the best I can get. Now, this one's pretty cool. It's a short manga containing several stories. Most of them are comedic, but some are serious, and I genuinely believe that the latter do enhance the world of the game and the characters quite a bit. Emeralda, for instance, gets quite a bit more of a character than she ever could have in the short screen time the game gives her, and it helps that the comedic stories are pretty funny as well. I would definitely encourage you to give this one a read. It's difficult to say more about it without going into spoilers, so instead I'll just say that the art is pretty nice with multiple artists working on the different stories. If you know what a 4-koma is, then you already know what to expect. This is a collection of small 4-panel gag comics, the kind of thing you'd find on the back of a newspaper. They're fun, and while some are significantly funnier than others, they're not meant to be taken seriously, so there's really no use complaining about them either. Worth noting, however, is the fact that similarly to Comic Anthology, several of the comics are drawn by different artists, which is also pretty fun. Both it and Comic Anthology were translated by some fans some years ago and are easily found online. And lastly, we have Xenogears, Thousands of Daggers. I really don't have a lot to say about this one since it's just the game's script with some screenshots attached. Yep, that's it really. And thus concludes Xenogears. For real this time. I think I've made it pretty evident by now that I happen to really like this game. Replaying it was just as enjoyable an experience as the first time. However, it is not my favorite Perfect Works game, not by a long shot. That title goes to a game I'll be talking about next time, when we discuss the entire Xenosaga franchise. This includes all 3 main games, every spin-off, all the side material, and even the changed re-releases. This video is already long enough though, and I dread working on that one. But that's when you'll next hear from me, outside of maybe community tab posts. So with that said, do me a favor here, and have a wonderful morning, day, evening, or night. Cheers.